The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Inquiries of Our Reality with Shayn Jones.
What is up, Inquirers, and welcome to the expanse of deep, open-minded conversation. I'm the one they call Shayn, and today for you guys, I have the author of Through the Veil, A Glimpse into the Afterlife, and we talk about her experiences connecting with her grandma from the other side, and some of the philosophical things that she's portrayed back over to her from the other side. Definitely a fascinating conversation. We dive into past life, spirituality, mysticism, reincarnation, and connect them into how they could possibly fit into the biblical paradigm, but definitely a fascinating conversation. I think you guys are definitely going to enjoy it. But before we get into that, just got two quick news and updates. First news and update is that this is going to be the first episode that is uploaded on the new hosting platform Spreaker. So if there are any issues with the episode, with ads, with anything, please report back to me, let me know, because I can't see what you guys are seeing on your side, and I just want to make sure that everything is working properly with the new hosting platform. And the second news and update is that the next event that I will be at will be Snarly Yow's Cryptid Halloween 3. It was the event that I was at last year for anybody that may have came out to that one, but it's in West Virginia, and this year it's going to be at the Ranson Civic Center in Ranson, West Virginia. Admission is free. There's going to be vendors, speakers, podcasters, and the Scream actress Nancy Ann Ritter. And from what I was hearing also, Snarly Yow mentioned the fact that there might be a haunted house at this event this year. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And of course, Orin and I are going to be speaking. We're going to be emceeing. We're also going to have our buddy Kevin from Where the Weird Ones Are. And we're also going to have Rick from IKNOWSQUATCH, another sponsor of the show. So it's definitely going to be a really fun event, and I really hope to see some of you guys out there. But if you guys want more information for that, there is more information down in the show description. So make sure you guys go and check that out. And just a quick message, this podcast has a strong focus on community engagement, so I encourage all listeners to share their own experiences and research on the show. If you would like to share an encounter, you guys can email me at ommencounterreports@outlook.com. And if you would like to be a guest on the show, you guys can email me at inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com. And every single thing that I mentioned is all available in the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, let's get into the show. Please welcome to the show, author, spiritual director, and Yu-Gi-Oh coach, Brandy Anderson. How's it going today?
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me on your show, Shayn.
So before we dive into everything, of course, I know that you have a book that you worked on, and obviously that's one of the main things people always definitely want to come on podcasts and talk about. But I always like to kind of lay a little bit of the groundwork first to kind of get up to the point of the book itself. So for anybody that may not be familiar with who you are, what you do, and a little bit of your background, why don't you let them know a little bit about yourself?
So in 2014, I had a spiritual awakening. And that sent me on a journey of just seeking for ultimate truth. And so I was raised in a Christian context, although at the time of my spiritual awakening, I really wasn't plugged into any kind of church. I really wasn't practicing any form of religion. But because I was coming from that background, from my childhood, I plugged into a few churches moving forward and just in an attempt to mine out ultimate truth. And so I spent a lot of time in churches studying, wrestling with theological, philosophical questions in that context. And ultimately, I came to a place where mainstream religious answers to life's most important questions were just less than satisfying. And I finally shifted into a more of a contemplative space, so still in a Christian context, but more mystical, more experiential. And so from that place, I had a lot of peace, a lot of it was just a place where I was able to sort of come up for air and just really just rest. And rest in the mystery, because there are a lot of mysteries. When you wrestle with faith type issues, there are just a lot of things that are just ineffable. And so, and from within that space, while I was, I was content to just rest in the mystery and engage with more of an experiential faith. My grandmother died, and when she did, after she crossed, she found a way to communicate with us from the other side. So I had this paranormal encounter experience that really served to connect theological dots for me and bring things into sharp focus in a way that I had not anticipated. So, and that is what led me to write the book. The book is, in the beginning, I do discuss how I came to communicate with my grandmother and all of the particulars around that. But the bulk of the book is just about things that I learned from her or as a result of my studies and my communication with her, philosophically and theologically, like what happens when we die and how that should impact the way that we live life now.
Well, I definitely love to dive into some of the research that you've done, kind of connecting with her and stuff. But of course, we kind of have to bring it back to the beginning of it. How exactly did you go about connecting with her? And how exactly did you get to a point where you started kind of getting into these like philosophical conversations with her?
Yeah, so I should start by saying that when we near the end of physical life, when we are about to die, when we are coming to the end of our physical lives, the veil between the spiritual and the physical becomes thin. And this is why people on their deathbeds will often report to see, loved ones that have already crossed, people that are in the room that the other people are not able to see, that type of thing. So the veil is thin and they're able to kind of see into that other realm as they near physical death. But at the time of actual death, when we actually do cross, the veil that is already thin opens, creating a portal, and the spirit just slips through instantaneously. Usually it's just a split second phenomenon. But my grandmother had an aversion to death. She was really afraid to die, and so she was really resisting physical death. And so when she crossed, she resisted in such a way that she became stuck sort of between two realities. And while she was stuck, it caused her portal to remain open in a way that is not ideal or not typical. But after she was, it wasn't much time at all that she was actually stuck. She said she was stuck for a little while, and then she gained, more clarity about what had happened to her, and she was able to cross. So she was unstuck, but the portal remained open. And so she used the portal to be able to affect the physical realm in ways that she would not have been able to without a portal. So that's kind of how it all began. That's how she was able to communicate with us. Without a portal, they're really, really limited on what they're able to manipulate in the physical realm. It almost requires a portal in order for spirits to like move objects or, even send certain signs to loved ones. But the way that my grandmother communicated with us was through the television initially. She figured out how to manipulate the Roku smart television. And the first thing that she did was she turned the TV on, navigated to search, and she typed the word hello. And my family members who live in the house where she did this were mortified. They were horrified. So they ran out of the house screaming. They were beside themselves with fear. And so she shut the television off and she didn't say anything else for a couple of days. And then she tried again. And the next time, same thing. She turned the television on, navigated to the search. And this time, though, she typed the word love. But they still were screaming, running out of the room. They were horrified. And finally, ultimately, I was like, why don't we, engage with this and see who it is? What do they want? Try to get to the bottom of it, because it would happen so frequently. And my family, they were so frightened by it that it was one of these things that they wanted it to stop. They thought it might be something bad. It was scaring them. but it just persisted. And so finally I was like, well, look, you have prayed, you've saged, you've cleansed the house, you've commanded, whatever entities to leave, and it persists. So we need to, try to determine, is this someone in the physical realm, like a hacker manipulating the television, playing a cruel prank, or if it is something spiritual, we need to determine, is it something bad? What, could it be Granny? What is this? And so we finally did sit down and engage with whoever it was. And pretty quickly we were able to determine that it could not be a hacker or anyone in the physical realm manipulating the television, because whoever it was could read our thoughts in real time, like in the moment. And it rocked us. We were mind blown. And so once we were able to determine that whoever it was knew things that were like deeply personal that no person would know. And like I said, we're able to read our thoughts in the moment. We knew, this is spiritual, but is it Granny? But then in the course of time, with trepidation, we did continue to communicate and try to just use discernment about who it was, what do they want, just try to make sense of what was happening. It became apparent that it had to be my grandmother. I mean, she came through as my grandmother, but we weren't just necessarily trusting that. But her love and concern for particular family members, certain relationships, she worked to heal certain relationships. She apologized for some hurts. She helped connect family members who needed like reconciling. And there were some destructive patterns in some people's lives that she really spoke into and addressed in a way that she saved some lives even. And so that is how we finally came to see, this is definitely Granny, and she's definitely staying in order to facilitate health and healing and wholeness. It was out of love. All of the communication was geared toward love, and it brought us all a sense of peace. So it wasn't frightening at all once we realized who it was, and actually sat down and engaged with the communication.
This is one of those things I talk about on the show all the time, actually, is the fact that, somebody will try to have a communication with like a grandparent or something like that. But if you don't understand what you're actually experiencing, and it's becoming off as like horrifying. And usually like the metaphor I make for it is like somebody going and touching your shoulder. Of course, you're going to get creeped out if you can't see it. You don't know what it is. But if you realize that it's like your grandma and that's like her thing she always did, is like when you're sitting on the bed, she'd come up, put her hand on your shoulder. Then all of a sudden it becomes less terrifying. But that invisible thing is what ends up making it scary. And moving on to like what you were kind of mentioning as far as communicating through the TV, reminds me of one of those things, almost like a Ouija board, that at first it's like you have no idea who you could possibly be communicating with. You're just getting these like random text generated, random letters and stuff like that. But once you kind of start trusting your gut feeling on stuff, then it seems like it kind of puts you down on the right path. Because when people have the bad experiences with like Ouija boards or poltergeists and stuff, it'll come off, of course, as friendly at first, but then it'll kind of start pushing it into like the darker realm. So I'm glad that you guys kind of kept your distance a little bit until you figured it out. And then once you actually started realizing that, she was doing things out of love and that she actually had these personality traits of your grandma, that it wasn't anything to fear. It's just a matter of, again, understanding what it is. But again, still kind of standing back and like, being cautious just in case, because you never know when it comes to this kind of stuff, especially if you can't physically see the face. And on the other side of that, before we get into some of the philosophical stuff, just out of curiosity, have you actually ever gotten to see like an apparition of her or anything, or possibly like her face in the TV or anything like that?
No, we never have. One thing, it requires energy. When they communicate from the other side, any kind of communication or manifestation or anything like that takes energy. And so, anytime she's communicating, energy is always a factor. And so in order for her to manifest, actual manifestation would require a lot of energy. And so, no, she doesn't. She has never done that. I mean, I'm sure she could if she wanted to. I've noticed it seems that in places that are haunted, like these poltergeist activity, these places that where there's a lot of poltergeist activity, first of all, I would say there's at least one portal in order for there to be poltergeist activity happening. And also poltergeist activity is typically bad. So if things are flying across the room, people are getting pushed, bitten, scratched, things like that. It's not something really to engage with. You put yourself at risk. Also, I want to point out that, like, if you play with a Ouija board, you could open a portal, taking a blind stab into the spirit realm. Like, you could open a portal into who knows what. And so, yeah, just anybody could pop through, and it's typically not something good. Now, my grandmother, because this portal happened when she was crossing, it's her actual portal. And because she remains and stays with it, she guards it, so to speak. So it's a safe portal. She and other loved ones are always at that portal. But yeah, it would be dangerous, I would say, to play with an open portal. That you're not familiar with.
We will be right back after this brief commercial break. But just a quick reminder, if you guys want to stay up to date on the show, you guys can always go and follow Inquiries of Our Reality and Open Minds Media on Instagram, Facebook, Discord, YouTube, and TikTok. Now feel free to fast forward through these commercials so we can hop right back into the show. And we are back, so let's get back to it. Just out of curiosity, and hopefully this isn't too personal, I assume that she would have passed at like the hospital, but did she pass away at this house that you're having these interactions with? So the portal itself is at the house itself?
Right. That's exactly right. She passed away at home, and so the portal is where she passed. So it's in the room that she passed in, and so which happens to be the room that the television is in. So, there are, according to my grandmother, there are a lot of portals in hospitals, and what she would call loud. When there are a lot of spirits, she calls it loud. And I'm like, does that mean is it crowded? And she's like, yes, but loud. And so, she says hospitals are extremely loud with lots of portals.
So I'm assuming the idea is that, again, you're somewhat attached to your portal itself. So most people kind of often wonder, like, why they're stuck to a specific location that they passed away in, or that their remains or something like that are in. I'm assuming that you might be able to move the portal location possibly with, like, the ashes of somebody or, like, the remains or something. But maybe just the whole idea between why something stays in the specific area, even if they destroy the building, whatever, is because they have that portal there. And again, just kind of asking from like your grandma's perspective, I'm assuming the idea is that if you enter the portal itself closes. That's like the light at the end of the tunnel. But if you choose not to go through it, then this portal basically just remains open. So then when you have these like haunted areas, you have these like hospitals, like she was mentioning, there's just all these portals that basically don't get entered into. And that's what ends up creating these like weird rifts where you have a lot of this paranormal activity. But as soon as somebody crosses through that portal, I'm assuming that that portal collapses, and that's kind of the end of that in that location, at least from that portal opening, from that specific person passing or whatever happened to them.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, the like to your first point, wherever a person crosses, that's where their portal would be. So if there is a portal, most people do not create portals. They just slip through instantaneously, and they're not even aware that they could have created a portal. Basically, my grandmother, it was like a fortuitous accident. So because she was putting up a fight, resisting, she didn't want to cross, it created this portal, but the portal can't be moved. So the portal's here, in the house that she crossed in, and it cannot, we couldn't, even with ashes or remains or anything like that, we couldn't move the portal. So it's important that, she says it's important that we keep the house, that we never sell the house, things like that, because that portal, would be there regardless. But yeah, what was your second question about that?
Well, it made me think of something else that I was going to ask you too. So at least from your grandma's perspective, I don't know if you've actually talked to her about this, but when people have like a family member that passes away and they seem to have this phenomenon where they kind of like follow them around or like travel with them, is it one of those things that maybe the attachment or love bond is so strong with the family that they're able to get more distance between the portal, but the portal would still technically be wherever they passed away at, even if they moved to the other side of the country and this family member like attached themselves to the family and followed them over there somehow?
Yeah. So, well, in the spirit realm, we can be multiple places at once, which is trippy to think about. But, like my grandmother can be with me and also with my cousin and also with my aunt sort of simultaneously. She's not bound, like we are, to a physical body where you can only be in one location at one time. And so, certainly a loved one who has or someone who crosses who has an attachment to a particular loved one, they will pretty much be with that person, follow them if they go on vacation, if they're traveling, going to work, they'll kind of be with them and watching over them wherever they go. But it's not to say that they are absent from other locations or other places. Like my grandmother can be present at the portal and also be with me in my home. I don't live in the house that she crossed in. There have been instances where I've been on the phone with my cousin who lives in the house where my grandmother crossed, and my grandmother's able to, like type on the television, but she's able to communicate specific things like that are going on with me in my house. Like, like she can see like what the dog is doing, or, I don't know, or who's sitting next to me, things like that. And she's able to communicate that at the portal. So it's like a both and. She's able to be both places at once. And also she's not stuck anymore, and her portal remains open, but she has went through it. So, and she could come and go. Like she could go on further into what she calls the beyond, the spirit realm, the astral plane, on into the other is highly stratified, but she could move further away from us and then still come back and communicate. She doesn't move away, but she could. So the portal is just an open door, so to speak. And she can come through it to communicate, to type, manipulate the physical realm, but she can also push back through the other side of it, and then, and be completely immersed in the spiritual realm. So it's kind of like just having an open door between the physical and the spiritual, so to speak.
Kind of a weird thing to think about, and I don't know if you get into this whole idea, but the whole consciousness traveling as groups, I feel like that could potentially answer why some of these people kind of stick around and look over people, is because maybe it's a matter of like when you pass away and you say that you see all these loved ones standing around, if it's one of those things that you stay in this point where you're kind of tied to both worlds so you can watch over your family, but once your consciousness group, your soul group all passes, then you all go through the portal, you're all together, and then you restart into possibly the next life or whatever you believe might be on the other side. But I don't know if you've talked to her about this, but has she kind of talked to you at all about the whole idea of like soul groups or people like waiting as a group to be able to pass on through these portals?
Yeah, she talks about soul groups, and what she has communicated about soul groups to me is that we reincarnate together as a soul group. You don't necessarily have to wait at a portal or wait to cross in or through a portal for your soul group. You would go ahead, like if I died right now, I could go ahead and cross on into the beyond. I could go deep into the beyond and continue my journey in the spiritual realm, but I wouldn't reincarnate again, or I shouldn't, without my soul group. So I'm still waiting on them to kind of catch up. But I don't necessarily hang around the physical realm. I mean, that would be up to me. I could if I wanted, just like my grandmother remains with us because she's choosing to, she wants to, but she doesn't have to. But the key is, according to her, that we should always reincarnate within the context of our soul group. And if we don't, we could come back in a way that is not helpful for our own journey because of our relational context to other people. It could put us outside of our family entirely. Like if we came back too soon, if there's no place for you to come back into within your own family, then you would potentially go into a strange family where you have no previous context.
I mean, I think it's one of those things too, that kind of connecting it into some of your background, you said coming from like a biblical perspective on things, the whole idea about heaven, I don't think that it's like could necessarily, I mean, it's definitely possible that it's this other plane, that's this infinite paradise, but I feel like if it's one of those things that if God created the world and the epitome of what he created is life and being on earth and enjoying all of the things that are on this planet, then heaven itself wouldn't necessarily be this otherworldly, other realm type place necessarily for human. If you're looking at it from like the more metaphorical perspective, it would be to come back with the ones that you love and re-exist again in this physical plane. Like, I definitely think that there's a location possibly called heaven or this other realm that these angelic beings, whether you're looking at them from like an extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or biblical perspective, another plane. But I think that this like heaven plane for people is being able to be in the physical, because it seems like when you start getting into like all of the darker things in the in the spiritual realm, their grasp is to be something physical. So clearly, even in the spiritual realm, the epitome of existence seems to be being physical. So I feel like it would definitely make sense in the biblical heaven perspective to reincarnate with your soul group and enjoy the physical plane that was created by whatever you view as the creator being.
Yeah. So, well, I would say that heaven is not a place we go to, but a place we come from. Heaven is a state of existence that we can carry within us now. It's available now. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within you. So it is very much an inner atmosphere. And so reincarnation really is just a chance to, it's really a testament to the grace of God that we are afforded unlimited opportunities to kind of get things right, to come into alignment. And it's easier to learn your karmic lessons and come into alignment in the physical realm because that is the realm where we generate karma to begin with. So a lot of people would choose to reincarnate just so that they can continue to do their inner work, to try to awaken, to try to come into alignment, which is another way to say, experience heaven, because heaven really is a matter of transcending the ego, like letting go of those base attachments, those physical compulsions, addictions. I mean, we're even addicted to our opinions, things like that. I mean, just to let go of all of that. So I definitely would say that there is something metaphysical like a plane of existence. Another dimension is what it is. It's an alternate dimension that would be a heavenly dimension, or it's what Jesus resurrected into, according to my grandmother. It's something where, like, Jesus was able to appear in locked rooms, like just suddenly appear, and then he was all, like to materialize or dematerialize. But he was also in a physical body in the sense that he ate fish, invited the disciples to touch him, so he was tangible in some way. But he was also able to, like teleport. So whatever that was, whatever dimension he went into, that's kind of that's the trajectory of where everything is kind of headed. So I would say that heaven is definitely something, another dimension, something different than this physical realm. But ultimately, it's a matter of coming into alignment within ourselves first and foremost. And so if we have an inner peace, if we've done our inner work, if we're in alignment, then it really doesn't matter whether we're in the physical or the spiritual or whatever dimension. We'll have peace and joy regardless of our external circumstances. And it's also why my grandmother is able to stay at her portal as she chooses to, is because she's able to do her inner work, whether she's there or here in the physical, or whether she moves on into the beyond. I mean, you're doing your inner work. Your whatever level of consciousness you've attained when you cross, you take that right with you, and you just continue on in your journey from there.
See, this is one of those things that I always talk about, how I think that different religions, different perspectives kind of have like different views of the same events going on. So I think this is definitely one of them, that a lot of people kind of take this like new agey idea or mystical idea and kind of like push it out of like the Christian perspective. But if you go back to like the roots of Christianity, I mean, it was all mysticism to begin with, and then it all kind of rooted out from there and made it so that like only certain people were doing these rituals, only certain people were doing these specific rites and things. So it kind of pushed away from like the average person doing like the mystical side of things. But it seems like a lot of people, when they communicate with this other side, it definitely seems more mystical than it does the complete, like, what we're given Christian perspective. And maybe it's just a matter of a lot of the things on the other side are hard to describe, or at least when the Bible was written, like the language itself just wasn't developed enough at the time to be able to state all of these different ideas. But even getting into like the portal thing, I mean, I've had a few different people who've come on the show and talk about near-death experiences, and one of them in particular talked about when he had a near-death experience at the hospital, how he saw this like wall that basically turned into like a giant rotating like white portal-looking thing. So it's something that I've heard of multiple people talking about. So there is definitely something to it. And a lot of people kind of throw this idea off, again, because of having more of like the biblical perspective on things and just portals not necessarily fitting in. But it seems like as things are kind of progressing, we're reconnecting with like the roots of things and realizing that all of these different religions have different pieces of the puzzle. And we're finally getting to I don't want to say like an infinite point of being able to understand it, but we're finally starting to, you know, at least put the edge pieces of the puzzle together to make it so that we can maybe start working into the center eventually.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing is, you know, the Bible, the Bible has been misinterpreted. That's what it really boils down to. So it's not so much like reincarnation. People, you know, like I said, I was coming from a Christian context. And so reincarnation is definitely not a part of the Christian tradition that I was raised in. And I would venture to say that most, you know, in most Christian denominations, it would be considered heresy, you know. But in reality, reincarnation does not contradict the Bible. It just contradicts mainstream interpretations of the Bible. So
even the portal thing with the Book
of
of Enoch. I mean, how many portals are in the Book of Enoch? But it was removed from the standard Bible, but still is considered part of the Bible in Ethiopia and a couple other places. So.
Right. So we have this mainstream evangelical interpretation going on, and so it masks the truth that's really hidden in the scriptures. And also, like you were saying, each tradition has like a different glimpse into. Nobody knows. I mean, that's the thing, the afterlife, what comes next. I mean, even I'm able to communicate with my grandmother, and still there's so much mystery. And some things, when I ask, she'll say no say, because it's too ineffable. Like, it's things that my human brain, my finite brain, just couldn't process some of the things. There are no words for her to tell me some things. So, so it's just all of the scriptures, whether they're Christian scriptures, Jewish, you know, like the Jewish scriptures, or even, you know, like you have the Buddhist philosophy, all of that, they're all just kind of hinting at the same kind of thing. Well, Hindus, you know, and they talk about reincarnation, and I feel like there's truth in all of these traditions, and everybody's trying to put language to something that is ineffable. And so we're unable to really know and really articulate with any clarity what it's like on the other side. So it's like all of these glimpses, you know, from different angles. It's almost like looking at a stone, like a jewel, a diamond. And as you turn it in the light, the different facets, you know, catch the light and reflect and refract light a little differently. And I feel like that's the way it is with all of these different religious traditions. They're all looking at the same thing and coming from a different perspective. And I feel like if we could just kind of just relax our grip. That's the thing. Christians, they have such a tight grip on, this is the way it is. My truth is the only truth. If you don't believe the way I believe, then you'll burn in hell for all eternity. But if you could just relax your grip and listen to what all of these different voices are saying, there's truth to be gleaned in all of it.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. But before we get into this commercial break, if anybody is interested in supporting the show or any of the work I do over here, you guys can go and check out the OMM Patreon. Over there is 7-day free trials available for all of the tiers, and it is constantly updating with new shows and different stuff going on. You guys can also go and check out the OMM merch store, constantly getting updated with new designs, not just pertaining to the podcast themselves, but also cryptid, paranormal, and extraterrestrial related designs. And the third way you guys can support the show, if you guys think I deserve it, is that you guys can leave a 5-star review or rating for the show on iTunes or Spotify. And if you guys leave a 5-star review, of course, I will read on the show and give you guys a big shout out. Now let's get to the commercial break so we can hop back in the show. And we are back. So let's hop right in. See, I think it's one of those things too that I definitely take into consideration the whole like fallen angels perspective, that there's of course like this misinformation that gets thrown in intentionally that kind of pulls people away from like how you're intended to supposed to use things. Like one of the examples that I make is the whole idea between like the wise men following the stars. I feel like that's a little bit more literal, that they were actually like reading the stars to know that Jesus would have been born, so they followed the stars after that. So they're using it in the positive way that it's intended to be used for. But after you kind of have like the fallen angel paradigm that kind of comes in, I definitely think that there's these other sides that are, again, portraying themselves as gods, but teaching you the same information, but in a skewed way that you can use it in the way that it's not necessarily intended to be. So that's definitely something that kind of has to be taken into consideration when you're taking in all of these different viewpoints of like world religions ones are, like which ones are coming from the bad sources and manipulating the good information so that it's not necessarily good information. But I don't know where the validity to this is, but I've heard people make claims that during like the 30 years when you didn't really hear anything about Jesus, I've heard claims saying that he like traveled and he went around and he met these like priests and these different other people. And one of the ones that I heard a reference to at some point was that he went and he met like different like monks and stuff like that. So he like learned like how to meditate and do all of this kind of stuff. So if there is any validity to those claims, and again, I'm not sure exactly where that base of information is coming from, but I feel like if there is solid evidence of that, it definitely proves that not every religion is necessarily against each other. There are good components to all of these things, and there definitely is a tie into each other. But, if you look at something so peaceful like Buddhism, a lot of people look at that as like new agey, like it's, something that's like not intended to be followed under like the Christian paradigm. But at the end of it, it's one of those things that it's just teaching you to be relaxed and centered within yourself and accept the things that come to you. So it's not anything that's necessarily like against it. And again, if Jesus actually learned how to go out and meditate and actually do this kind of stuff, I feel like it brings more validity into more of like the monk type belief in, again, reincarnation, meditation, that there is a Christian connection and tie to that.
Yeah, for sure. Buddhism is not a religion; it's a philosophy, and so really you could be a Buddhist and a Christian simultaneously, and the overlap is, it's they complement one another nicely. I would say that Buddhism, and I'm not a Buddhist, but just my study of Buddhism and in my own journey, reading and learning Buddhism makes me a better Christian. So it just brings things into sharper focus. And I feel like the language used in more Eastern thought, Eastern philosophy, is a lot more helpful about how to like tangibly live a life of peace and love and joy. All of the things that Jesus embodied and modeled and taught. But the church, like I said, they get things so twisted. And so the way that things are communicated is often really not helpful. And, it'll be like, yeah, you should, definitely not. You should die to yourself. That's something that people say in Christian circles, die to yourself, which is transcending the ego in other language. But I've never, until I had really opened the door into like the Buddhist, the more Eastern ways of thinking, a lot of the language in Christianity, it almost leaves you with, well, okay, great, die to self. Well, how do you do that exactly? Like there's no clear directive on exactly how do you live out this reality. And oftentimes in Christianity, it's all about, well, you accept Jesus into your heart, pray a prayer, invite Jesus into your heart, and then you're saved, which means you will go to heaven when you die. So it's very much about like an afterlife. You're going to float away into eternal bliss when you die because you prayed this prayer, but it really has no bearing on the day-to-day life that you live. Like, are you living your life? Do you have anxiety? Are you racked with worry? Are you able to live a liberated and free life in the here and now? And so that's what it means to be saved. Saved is liberated. So you'd be liberated from the tyranny of your own ego. And so the Buddhist philosophy really gave me language for that in a way that I was able to apply it in my life and actually live into, the teachings of Jesus. The thing is that we're supposed to embody love, live from love. Love is, the answer to every question is love ultimately. And so I just found the Buddhist language was really helpful in being able to press into that more fully.
See, I think there's a lack of understanding when it comes to like the Christian perspective of Buddhism that, when you're looking at it from like an outside perspective, you're looking at it as possible like idol worship, where if you're actually looking at it from like the Buddhist perspective, it's not necessarily that they're idolizing Buddha like he's a god or anything like that, just rather that he created this philosophy that seems to work for people. So it's not necessarily like idolization, but if you're on the outside, you definitely see it that way. And I could totally get how you would kind of push away from it and not connect how these two things would actually be connected. But kind of diving back into some of the, like the more philosophical and theological aspects of the conversation, since we're kind of already going down this path, you mentioned earlier that you'd brought back some stuff from your grandma, and I guess I'd like to go over some of like the most important things that you feel that she's brought back to kind of understand this philosophical slash theological paradigm.
Yeah, so I've asked all kinds of questions, and in the book, I discuss heaven and hell, and really, in a nutshell, it just as it relates to being a state of existence, not a place we go to, but a place we come from, and hell being, whereas heaven is being in inner alignment, having your inner integrity, having peace and joy in the midst of all external circumstances. Hell is It was Jeff Foster who said, "Heaven is this moment, and hell is the burning desire for this moment to be different." And that really sums it up nicely. When we press against or push against the present moment and wish things were other than they are, we create suffering. And so that's all of our suffering, all of our frustrations really are born out of that resistance to life itself, resistance to reality as it is. And so my grandmother was able to shed light on that, which that was huge for me. I had already shifted away from like the idea that eternal conscious torment was true. I didn't believe that anymore by the time my grandmother crossed. But being raised in a Christian tradition, that was certainly something that I was brought up believing. But in my own study, I had come to see that universal reconciliation was probably the most likely reality. But so I was a hopeful universalist. But my grandmother, after she crossed, I was able to talk to her, and she confirmed that universal reconciliation is the truth. So ultimately, all will be reconciled, but that doesn't mean that we're let off the hook for our own inner our own inner work. We have to take responsibility for who we are and who we become. So really, it's a matter of just coming into alignment with truth. And she's also communicated that there is a fire on the other side. It's something that we all go through. I say all. Anyone who's reached a certain level of consciousness would go through this fire. Well, I guess all do go through it, but it would only be painful to those who have reached a certain level of consciousness, like babies or animals. If they cross through the fire, it wouldn't be, they would just breeze right through it, and there would be no negative repercussions. But for the majority of us, it is a purging fire that is it's a refining fire. So it's not retributive, it's restorative. It's intended to burn away anything that interferes with love, anything that would keep us trapped in our cycles of suffering. And so, so the language of fire in the Bible is valid. There is a fire, and even Paul talks about in Scripture that there's a fire. He says that all will pass through. He says that if you've built with hay and stubble and whatever, basically egoic type materials, then that will be incinerated. It will be burned up in the fire. But if you have used jewels like, rubies and pearls or what, in other words, if the good works, you had transcended your ego, then, those things will be saved through the fire. He says, but even someone who suffers an utter loss, like everything is all lost in that fire, that person themselves will be saved through it. So even Paul he intuited this fire that burns away anything that interferes with love. So those things are some of the things that I talk about, but probably reincarnation itself was the biggest takeaway. That was not a part of my worldview at all. It was not something that I really even gave any thought to until my grandmother told me that it was true. And then so I began to study that a little more, and I realized pretty quickly that reincarnation really is woven into the tapestry of life itself. I mean, we see it with the cycles of the seasons, the solar system, the planets. I mean, everything. Every moment is a death and a rebirth. And so, so now I see it. I see it as an almost obvious reality that was so overlooked for so many years, but now it makes so much sense. And now I have a richer and deeper faith because of that, because I see that God is long suffering, and we're not headed to hell in a handbasket. In other words, there are unlimited opportunities to awaken and to come into wholeness, and God really is love. And so, and he's patient. God is, I say he, but God is not a he, but God is patient. And reincarnation is just a testimony to the grace and patience of God.
That's what I was going to bring up too, is the whole idea that if God loves his children, I don't know why he'd want them to suffer eternally. Like, that doesn't necessarily make sense to me. Even if they are somebody who has been just like one of the worst people on the entire planet, I feel like it's one of those things that he wants them to be able to make up for their sins and restart over again and be a better person and have this growth. So the eternal flame to like burn away the sins definitely seems like it makes more sense. And it may have been one of those things that it's a matter of how people want to decipher the words when they actually read something. That, some people can take that as like a physical location or something, and other people kind of take it again as this actual curtain, rather, that you kind of like go through that ends up like burning your sins away. But you kind of brought up the whole idea too of past lives a little bit, and just out of curiosity, just because you've kind of done research and dived into it, have you ever done a past life regression yourself, or have you, communicating with your grandma, ever gotten into a conversation about anybody in your family's past lives or anything?
Yeah, so I've never done a past life regression session, although I think they're super interesting, and I have friends who have done them, and I've talked to them about it, and it's just really cool how that works. But I have talked to my grandmother about my past life, and then family members also. So she doesn't tell us everything. Some things are a no-say, because some things we're not supposed to know, is what she would say. But in my past life, she says that I owned a zoo, which is not a surprise. I love animals. And even in this life, I've always had a lot of dogs. Dogs have been primarily I'm a dog person, but I love all animals. But yeah, in my last life, she says that I owned a zoo and that I rescued a lion named Penelope. And I was 45 years old, and the lion mauled me to death. So that's how I went out in my last life. And I've tried to like Google that and look up, like someone, but I don't know, like it seems, and she won't tell me what year either, but I for some reason, just based on everything that she has told us about like myself and my other family members and our things that she said, it makes me believe that it would have been like mid to late 1800s perhaps. And so I'm sure there's nothing on Google, about some random woman, mauled to death by a lion named Penelope. But anyway, it's one of those things that is interesting to know, but I don't know. And then I said, she said, you learned your lesson. You learned your lesson. In this life, you have dogs. And I was like, no, I didn't learn my lesson. I just didn't have an opportunity to buy a zoo. Now, no, that's all it was. I just didn't have an opportunity this time.
Inquiries of All Reality will be back after this brief commercial break, but just a quick reminder, don't forget to go and check out the awesome sponsors of the show, IKNOWSQUATCH, Cryptoteeology, Snarly Yow Natural Products, Oregon-ite, Dimension Devices, and Big Ape Threads. More information and discounts for those are all available down in the show description. Now feel free to fast forward through these commercials so we can hop right back into the show. And we are back, so let's get back to it.
See, and it's funny too, because you never necessarily know if it was your last life as far as like the line goes, because we look at things like they're chronological, but it seems like from a lot of the people I've talked to, it doesn't necessarily work like that. Your past life could have been, in the 1600s, where somebody else's past life could have been, at a totally different period, and then you live these multiple lives where before that life you lived one in like the 1800s, so you can't necessarily like fully know if it was your last one chronologically, but one thing that always fascinated me is this whole idea of like birthmarks and how you died in the life beforehand. So just out of curiosity, do you have like any like birthmark or anything like that on your arm? If it was even maybe your past, the last life chronologically, I guess.
Yeah, no, I don't have any birthmarks like that, but I did ask her if that was true. If people who have these birthmarks, if it was, if it had something to do with death in their last life, like if they were shot, they would have, and she says, yes, that does happen. And that some people do have these birthmarks that are actually scars from their death in their previous incarnation. And also what you point out that it could have been a different year, and it's not, because time is an illusion, right? So we're looking at it in a chronological sense and trying to, think about, past life being, and the one before, it's all like a chronological succession of events. But also something that's really neat that she has communicated is that there aren't just past lives, like in a past life in this 3D reality would definitely be chronological because time does exist where we exist. But from her vantage point, time is an illusion and things are happening simultaneously in a sense. But also there are alternate realities. And so you not only do you have past lives, you have alternate reality lives or other timelines that are, also playing out simultaneously with this life. So each life cycle, you have all of these other alternate realities kind of going at once.
I actually had somebody on, it probably wasn't too long ago, it was maybe like 10 episodes ago, but he had a past life where it was actually a future point, and the whole time he was like talking about the experience, I wondered if it could have been maybe another reality, but I guess it could theoretically go both ways if time isn't necessarily linear and we're only looking at it from like our 3D perspective. But kind of going back again into like some of the birthmarks and stuff, it seems always interesting that these birthmarks seem to be over places that people could have theoretically gotten killed from. Like, I have one over my heart, and I actually did a past life regression at one point, and I was a Viking in a past life, and I don't know if it was, again, the last one chronologically or not, but it seems like if you're looking at it from like a warrior's perspective, it would definitely make sense to get stabbed in the heart. But like, my daughter has one on the back of her neck, which again would completely make sense that you'd get stabbed or something in the back of the spine, in the back of your neck in a past life. And then I don't remember who it was. I have another family member that has one up underneath their rib, where it seems like it'd be one of those spots where if somebody got stabbed there, it would be a punctured lung and you probably end up suffocating and dying from it. So I've always found it fascinating that there's never ones that are like, in the middle of your hand or something like that. They're always in these like places that are like main artery points, or if somebody got stabbed there, it would have been something that they would have died from.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And and I haven't really looked into that deeply, but yeah, I have heard of people saying, that they got the past life regression and that they have a birthmark where where they, were stabbed or shot or things like that. I know Dolores Cannon, there are some incidents where she did past life regressions with people, and they had, or one guy, it was a pain. He lived with a perpetual intense pain. I don't know if it was in his leg. I can't remember. And so, but through past life regression, he was able to realize the source of that pain was something that happened to his, what I think it was his leg. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, he was able to resolve that by going back and facing that through regression. So that was pretty cool.
And as far as kind of getting back in your book too, before we run out of time, you said that you dived into obviously like how you've connected with her, some of the philosophical and theoretical thing, or not theoretical, theological, yes, theological things that you would actually talk to her about. As far as like what else your book covers, is that kind of like the extent of it, or do you kind of dive into some other different aspects, or is there again some more really important messages that she brought over that you want to share with the listeners?
So, like I was saying, the heaven and hell and reincarnation are parts of the book. There are, things that I address in the book. And it kind of follows a succession. So I start out, where karma, I think that's maybe the first chapter where I discuss karma and how that ties into reincarnation. And then from there, I discuss heaven and hell. And I also eventually I get to, I discuss, like darkness, demons, the devil. I have a whole chapter on that. And then my final chapter is on like the end times type stuff. So basically this idea that, that like Revelation and other Matthew 24, the discourse, Jesus's discourse in Matthew 24, a lot of people interpret that to be prophesying some future destruction of the world, some like apocalyptic end times kind of situation. But according to my grandmother, that's not true. All of those things have already been fulfilled in 70 AD. So that's what they were about. They were about the fall of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and that's already been fulfilled. But I just go into it in more depth. I take it, like verse by verse and kind of break it down and explain what is being really communicated. And then I I tie things up by just discussing where things are really headed, the trajectory of everything. It's not headed toward, like the coming apocalypse is love. That's really it. That's where this whole thing is headed. Our whole purpose for being here on this earth is to awaken into love. And so everything is just evolving in that, in that direction. And you can see, the tension on the world stage, everything, so that's not to say that, that we wouldn't have like nations rise and fall, for instance, and things might blow up and just, things are cyclical. But ultimately, that's not where things are headed toward, destruction and gloom and doom. I mean, things are actually headed toward restoration.
See, it seems like one of those things that no matter which perspective you're coming from, everybody's talking about this great period of like enlightenment or elevating to the next reality, next dimension, or elevating consciousness. So no matter which perspective you come into it, it seems to be this idea that no matter what comes up, that when people have extraterrestrial experiences, they say that they're talking about this happening. People have like paranormal experiences or near-death experiences. Like, it all seems to keep coming back around to this thing. So I feel like it's one of those things that the dark forces are in full extent right now, just trying to push every single thing that they have, because they know that they're about to lose this battle, which is why the world seems like it's so absolutely crazy right now, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But it's a matter of like, all right, you already know you're about to lose, so you're just blasting off your entire arsenal at this point just to see if anything's going to stick. And people need to realize that, again, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and if everything keeps coming back around to this idea, stick through it, get through all this tough time happening, because they're not going to have this arsenal forever. If they keep firing these shots, they're eventually going to run out. And when they run out, we're getting into this this clearing where we're all able to understand, connect with each other, and rise to this point that we're supposed to be at, or elevated consciousness. And that we can all get to a point where, maybe we're able to communicate with each other in a totally different way. People talk about this like telepathic ability to connect, because, physical language is primitive because it can't fully portray an idea, and depending on which language that you speak, you can't necessarily portray the idea the same as you would in a different language. Like, English is supposed to be one of the most intricate languages and one of the best to be able to like describe ideas and theories and philosophy and stuff like that. But kind of going in a circle here a little bit, but I've often wondered if the whole Tower of Babel concept was a matter of everybody was able to connect, and they were at this higher elevational period, but they were developing faster than they were supposed to, where they needed to get to this point of love first before they were able to communicate in that aspect. So it was one of those things that it got knocked out and everybody had to develop physical language, but we're getting back to that point when we're actually supposed to be able to connect to the higher realms, the higher dimensions, and we'll get back to that point where we're all able to communicate regardless of language, because we'll be able to portray these ideas mentally rather than trying to describe something to somebody who speaks a totally different language.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that point. That's something that I have learned, and since the book, this is not actually in the book, but the fall in the Garden of Eden, it seems, was the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve, or humanity in the garden, they were in a different dimension. They were in the astral sphere, so they weren't in the physical realm initially. And so the fall is actually a fall into the physical. So as their consciousness expanded or reached a point of dualism, really, of the tree of knowing good and evil, is the dividing, labeling, judging mind. And so as humanity fell into dualism, they fell into physicality, and we're even told that God made for them garments of skin, which is to say physical, mortal bodies. And so, I would definitely, and that also explains why people live so long early, in the early, like the Old Testament. If you go through there, people were living 700-800 years, and it's because the fall into the physical was relatively new. And so as humanity progressed along, they lived a lot longer. And also the telepathic communication may have certainly, that's not something I've asked my grandmother specifically about, but I definitely will add that to my list. But that makes sense, because I could see that over time becoming more and more diminished, as humanity sinks deeper and deeper into this physical delusion. And really the world of matter, the world of form, keeps us from seeing the reality of what's really there. What we don't see supports what we do see. And so our physical existence keeps us, in a state of delusion where we're unable to see things for what they truly are. It's like seeing the control panel on an airplane. You're flying by the instruments instead of seeing the actual sky. And that's kind of how we are. We have this control panel, the way that we process the world. And so that's what we see things not as they are, but how our finite physical brains are able to process and make sense of the world around us. So yeah, we're definitely headed towards something more than this physical reality. It's something more than we were initially in the garden. Also, it's a higher dimension. Even I know, like in spiritual circles, you hear people speak of 5D reality, which is just a metaphor for spiritual alignment or enlightenment. But in reality, like my grandmother is in 5D now, is what she tells me. Like the actual dimension that she exists in is 5D. And so humanity is headed for something beyond that, because to be in 5D is still limited. I mean, my grandmother would love to be able to hug us, touch us, things like that, and she's unable to do so from a 5D type reality. And really, the fact that she can communicate with us is a rare gift. Most people can't even do that. So we're headed toward whatever it was that Jesus entered into, that resurrection reality where he was able to present physically, but also teleport, materialize, dematerialize, and I'm sure telepathy would be a part of that. That is what we're headed into, and it's a dimension far beyond 5D. So yeah, that pretty much. So I said a lot, but I think it's really interesting. That's a fascinating. You raised a really good point, and that's something I want to talk to my grandmother more about.
You'll definitely have to let me know if you bring back any more answers, even if we don't, set up a show anytime soon. You just have to shoot me a message and let me know. But just kind of make a metaphor as far as like reality goes. I think it's one of those things where it's almost like a bird getting kicked out of the nest. Like if you imagine that the nest itself is like heaven or this higher realm, this other reality, and that the ground itself is like the physical realm. I think it's one of those things that we had to get kicked out of the nest. And as you're getting kicked out of the nest, you still remember the nest and how the nest works. But once you hit the ground, that's when you kind of like attach this physical reality. But you have to bring it back to this high point where you're in between, where you're flying, and it makes it so that you kind of have this mixture where you have the elevated plane and you have the ground plane, the physical plane, and you're able to exist at this perfect point in the middle where you're half spiritual, half physical, and you're able to enjoy both sides of it, being able to connect with the spiritual realm, but also being able to enjoy and experience the sensations of the physical realm itself too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's the thing. I should also say that physical is not bad. And that, it's not to say, the world of form or physicality is evil and we should, we should wish that we weren't in this physical body. So it's not like, because that's a very Gnostic way of interpreting things. But really and truly, I mean, the physicality is not bad. It gives us an opportunity to become deluded. We get lost in it. We get out of balance with it. And so, yeah, it's definitely about being able to enjoy this physical reality with balance. And that's what I think Buddhism does a really good job, teaching how to live in that balance between that tension of opposites, where you're able to have peace and joy and have that inner alignment because you realize that you are one with all reality. One consciousness, the spiritual aspect of things is front and center, and you see things from that vantage point. You see the divine in all other beings, and so you honor the divine in all other beings. So it just helps you to be able to live within that tension of opposites instead of being in Christianity. It seems oftentimes people are working to sever the certain things, like their attachments to the world, their worldly desires, they would seek to just get rid of. But when you do that, when you repress, when you try to cut something off in that way, you just intensify it. And so instead of bringing balance, people get out of balance, trying to press into the good and push the darkness away. And they put on these personas and, this mask and this spiritual front. But the actual inner work is not being done because they're not embracing all of it. The light and the dark, it has to be brought into balance. It has to be integrated. And that's how we transcend and move forward. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. And we are back. So let's hop right in. And of course, I got to bring it up too, because it's definitely one of those things that always fascinates me when people bring it up, especially when they have a perspective from the other side. You mentioned the fact that you have a chapter in your book talking about these dark entities, these demons. As far as the information that your grandma has brought back from like what these things are, where they come from, or any information she's given you on these things, what's kind of like the rundown from the afterlife perspective of these dark entities and beings?
Yeah, so, according to my grandmother, Satan or the devil is not an ontological being. And in scripture, we just have that Satan and the devil are really just personifications of evil come to its fullest expression in those instances. So just like, there's language in the Bible personifying God, and God is not a being, God is being itself. So it's just, humanity's way of articulating or making sense of something that is beyond articulating. So according to her, the devil and Satan are not ontological beings, but there are demons and other beings that some are malevolent and some are not. And so it's just like this world of duality that we find ourselves in this physical realm. You have all kinds of people around you. Same thing in the spiritual realm. There are all different kinds of entities in the spiritual realm. And there are also other entities from other dimensions, which, according to my grandmother, a lot of the UFO type stuff is just interdimensional stuff. It's not in our dimension, and that's why it kind of appears and disappears. It kind of pops in and pops out because it's kind of blinking in from another dimension. But yeah, she would say that in the book of Enoch, it talks about the Nephilim that bred with the women, and they created, the angels bred with the women and created a race of giants known as the Nephilim. And so the Nephilim, when they drowned in the flood, when they died, their disembodied spirits became demons. That's in Enoch. I forget exactly which chapter reference or whatever. I have it in my book though. But yeah, that's what she confirmed that that's exactly what demons are. Although not all bad entities are demons. There are other malevolent entities that aren't necessarily demons, and she says they're interdimensional in nature.
See, that seems to be where I seem to always come back to when it comes to extraterrestrials, is that they're not actually extraterrestrial, but rather like extra dimensional, and they're coming from other means or other planes of reality. I mean, I definitely think that there is a possibility that there are other physical, non-human beings that are existing within our reality, but I think the ones that we're having experiences with are something that's coming interdimensionally. And the demon question has been so vague for so long that nobody really knew where to go with it as far as like what demons were exactly. And it seems like it's getting to a point where anybody that I end up asking that question to, it kind of gives the same answer as far as, the fallen angels having or creating the Nephilim with the women. And then after that, of course, they had the Nephilim got killed in the flood, and then some of them, of course, lived. Some of the Nephilim did, but most of them got wiped out, and they became these disembodied beings that we know as demons. So I'm glad for growing up and having that be such a vague question that, 30 years later, now it seems like when you ask anybody who is looking at stuff from the Christian perspective on things, that is the answer that they give now. So I'm glad that has some validity to it now, and it's a recurring answer, and it seems like it's something that we've kind of figured out within the past 30 years finally.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say that in the majority of Christian thought, though, that's not a prominent answer. I guess they would say that that the devil is a fallen angel, and that the demons are just the other angels that followed him into his the war against God, and when he was cast down, that a third of the angels fell with him, and so that would be their standard answer to what are demons or where do demons come from. But it's really not biblical. It lacks any real support biblically. If you really hone down into the verses that are used to support that, you'll see pretty quick that they don't hold water. But yeah, Michael Heiser, who he's crossed now, but all of his work was really beneficial to me at that point when I was still trying to navigate some of these things, trying to understand before my grandmother crossed, before I was able to ask her anything. I found that Dr. Michael Heiser's work was really beneficial in helping me kind of make sense of some of these things.
That's somebody that, again, is referenced on so many different shows that I feel like he's one of the people that actually started kind of pushing the paradigm a little bit more forward as far as this type of conversation and topic goes. But it seems like maybe it's one of those things that it's like the new age of Christians kind of have this idea and understanding of it, but it's like the people that are still linked to the old ways, they're the ones that don't necessarily have this idea. But growing up in a Catholic household, I'm glad that it's gotten to a point now where the questions that I used to get in trouble asking are now something that people are asking and are part of the conversation, coming from a biblical perspective and not coming from people that are trying to like disprove religion or just make people angry that believe in a religion. Like, it's actually part of the conversation now, and it's crazy to see where it's come in the past few years. And I'm interested to see where this new paradigm goes and this new rebirth of like Christianity with this more interconnected understanding of connecting what we're looking at as like some quantum physics with it actually being something that connects with the Bible itself.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, also we have a lot of people are deconstructing their faith, the deconstruction community, and they're wrestling with these questions, and some people, they come out of deconstruction and they end up an atheist, or at least maybe an atheist for a time. But yeah, I think it's really, really cool that that a lot of these questions are being asked, that people are able to discuss some of these things with more openness and more clarity. Also, it helps that there's a lot more access these days. Like, traditionally people would go to seminary and they would study these things, and then they would, I don't know why, but they, like all of these things like that Dr. Michael Heiser shares. I mean, he's a Bible scholar, a Hebrew scholar. And so all of those things that he shares is just really things that you would learn, while studying at a higher level. But in churches, it's like the pastors, they fail to communicate all of those things. It's like, I don't know, it's like indoctrination into a certain way of interpreting particular verses or whatever. So yeah, I think it's really helpful that with the internet, the way that it is, and social media, although it has many downfalls, it also gives people access to a lot more information and a lot more points of views, and people who are, studying these things and putting material out for people to be able to access and learn for themselves.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to gatekeep this day and age, because if you're trying to gatekeep a piece of information, more than likely somebody else knows that information, and they're more than happy to release it on the internet somewhere. But kind of starting to wrap stuff up a little bit. I don't know if you actually fully said the title of your book, so I want to make sure that you say the full title of your book so people know what to look for. And before we get into words of wisdom and everything, I, of course, have to bring up, is there going to be another book that you're working on, or are you working on another project after your book that you already have released?
So my book is Through the Veil, A Glimpse into the Afterlife, and it's available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible on Amazon. My website is brandyanderson.net, and from there all of my socials are linked, but my handle on all of my socials is Brandy the Mystic. Currently, I have like a lot of irons in the fire as far as another book, several different ideas kind of flowing, but the one most pressing, the one at hand, I'm going to co-author with a friend of mine, Kendall McCullough, and it'll be more on shadow work. So not so much about the afterlife, more about how do we live how do we become aligned interiorly? How do we find inner integrity in a way? How do we get that peace and that wholeness? So it'll be more practical, tangible ways of coming into alignment, doing our shadow work, that kind of thing. So yeah, that I think that pretty much wraps it up. Yeah, that's how to contact me and what I have kind of going on right now.
When you guys end up getting that book together, you guys release it, I'll have to have both you guys come back on the show and talk about it together, because I always love having everybody that's involved with the book coming on and talking about it. Hold tight, guys. This is the last break, so stay tuned. And we are back, so let's hop right in. But before we close up, I always like to do words of wisdom from the guest to the listener. So if there was any words of wisdom you could bestow on the listeners, what might it be?
Yeah, I would just say that I guess I would leave you with this thought that death is just the doorway into an expansive journey of becoming whole. Yeah, so there's all of the fear around death because of the unknown, the uncertainty around it. I mean, certainly there's some apprehension around that, but ultimately everything is headed toward renewal and restoration, and nothing we love is ever lost. And so, yeah, I would just say, just relax and enjoy the journey, because life is a journey, and not a destination. So yeah, so enjoy the journey and don't get caught up in trying to reach a final destination or arrive at some sort of state of existence. Just embrace life in the now. Learn to just be present now and enjoy the journey along the way.
Man, I've said it a million times on the show that I think that life is about experience. So that's exactly what it is. It's not about the destination at the end. It's about the experience on the way to the end. But of course, you don't want the end to come by too soon, because when you have that road trip, I mean, it's all the roadside stops that end up being the things that are remembered. It's half the time it's not actually the destination itself. It's all the memories and everything that you end up stopping and doing on the way to that final destination.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's about just learning to rest in the moment. Really, that's it. I mean, Eckhart Tolle, his book, The Power of Now, if I could recommend one book for everyone to read, that's the one, because it really does encapsulate what it means to just be present and be joyful and content in the now.
I really appreciate you making the time to come on today. Really looking forward to next time. And as soon as you guys have an idea of when you guys are going to release that book, you'll have to let me know, and we'll definitely set something back up, because this is a great conversation, and we'll definitely have to do it again sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that. And so would Kendall. I know he would. And thanks for having me on. It's been great to be here.
If anyone would like to get in touch with me for any reason whatsoever, you guys can email me at inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you guys can get a hold of me through social media, Instagram or Facebook, but of course, Instagram is the one that I'm most active on. Or you guys can get a hold of me through the submission forums, which are available on the link tree. One of them is to contact me directly, which will go to my inquiries email, and the other one is to report an encounter. So if you guys have an encounter to report, don't forget to do that while you're there already. And every single thing that I've mentioned throughout the entire show is all available in the show description, and all of my links, of course, are available off the link tree, available down in the show description. And with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. I hope today's show has connected some dots in your own reality, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Reality isn't what it seems. I'm Dr. D's taking a watercraft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey, with a mic talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as a Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers, using a Ouija board to talk to the dead like a necromancer. There's so many questions and not enough answers. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality.